an ironic media production.
Visit us at ironickmedia.com.
You have to do it anyway, slowly, gradually, lovingly, feeling in control. I will never let someone push me to do something physically that I don't feel ready to do.
Right.
That's very important, that I don't feel safe in. Yeah, I try to talk myself through the fear. Normally, the fear responses that I get are like my biological system telling me, you're going to die, you're going to die, you're going to die. Don't die, stop doing what you're doing, you're going to die. That system is hardwired into us for protection. It's a great thing. But, I try to talk to that system and I'm like, hey, thank you for the warning. I feel you. I hear you.
Yeah.
This actually is really important for me to cross this street right now or to take this step, and it's going to be okay.
Hello, everyone. This is Chris and Lizzo.
We are a brother-sister team.
And on behalf of the Charcot-Marie Tooth Association, aka CMTA, we are coming at you.
We are coming at you from coast to coast. I live in California and Chris lives in freezing cold, snowy Vermont.
You got it, folks. And this is another fantastic episode of our famous podcast named what, Lizzo?
CMT, the number 4, me. CMT for me.
And that's right. A comprehensive podcast that's covering all aspects of CMT, the voice of individuals living with CMT, their challenges, and more importantly, their inspirational stories. And we cover all sorts of fun facts, research updates, updates on fundraising, interviews with the community, board members, branch leaders, CMTA leaders, and overall, an opportunity to spread awareness through the eyes of those with CMT. So, Lizzo, one thing I was thinking about during a recent podcast recording was meeting people with CMT who have noticeable symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you've experienced this, but to me, there is at times an awkward moment of exactly what to say. Where do you focus your eyes? And I can tell you, I remember my first introduction to someone with CMT. And what do you think I did?
You probably just messed it up, whatever you did.
Totally. I reached out and provided the typical guy handshake, and I felt like terrible because I could have caused damage to that individual. They withdrew their hands, and I was like, oh my God, this is so awkward. I was so apologetic.
I was there, and it was someone who had hand symptoms with CMT, right? It was really hard to grasp.
I didn't even know. And so I felt pretty bad, but it was a learning experience for me. So have you ever had a similar situation?
Oh my gosh. Yes. Actually, with our guest speaker today. So I met her about 12 years ago or more. And early in our relationship, we were walking back from a restaurant. We came across a huge obstacle, the curb.
Oh boy.
Yeah, the curb. And she stood there waiting. And I think I was just talking and I was halfway across the road before I noticed that she was not with me. And I looked back and she had this exasperated look on her face, like, hello, where are you? Here I am. And she's like, can I have your arm? And I'm like, oh my God. So I ran back over, gave her my arm. And then she taught me a lesson. She said, you, out of all people who work with C, you should have known that. Jeez. And we both just started cracking up. But it's true. I didn't even think, like, do I give her my arm? Do I not give her my arm? Do I carry her? Do I not carry her? I mean, it's hard to know. And I think you have to be honest about these things and just ask.
Yeah, completely agree. It is hard to know what to do with people. And hopefully we can dig a little deeper on this topic with our upcoming guests.
So Bethany Meloche is one of my closest friends. She has a YouTube channel. She's the author of the book, How Should a Body Be? She does guest interviews on overcoming obstacles, self-image, facing fears, cultivating the life you want. She's awesome. She also serves on the advisory board of the Charcot-Marie Tooth Association.
Cool.
Yep. So there you go. She she went to Berkeley. She was born in Michigan. I could go on and on and on about her credentials, but let's hear from her now.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's remember, we do have a guest speaker here. Lizzo, this isn't all you speaking.
No, I would like just to talk about Bethany the whole time.
Well, here we go. Good afternoon, good evening, or whatever time it is in England, Bethany. It's so awesome to have you. Welcome. Before you speak, I've got some questions. I'd like to spend the majority of this podcast speaking about Her Majesty the Queen and the royal family. I need the inside scoop. You're so close to it. True or false? I recently heard that Prince Charles is a vampire. True or false? Meghan Markle is a secret agent. That's what I heard. And the last, Queen Elizabeth was actually the first real Shakespeare. So that's what we focus on over here in the US of A. Back to you, Bethany. We'd love to know the answers to those questions, but in all respect, we are so psyched to have you and learn more from your experience.
Thank you both so much. It is such a pleasure to be on this podcast. I guess I'll address those urgent questions first, Chris. Those first two characters that you speak of, we prefer to pretend don't exist. As for Queen Elizabeth, Her Majesty, I think she is capable of anything, including being Shakespeare.
There you go. All right. You heard it, folks. There are the facts.
So let's get serious. Okay. Enough of the questions, Chris. Bethany, I know you pretty well, and you have a lot of fans in the CMT community. And a lot of people know your story, but a lot of people don't. New people are being diagnosed all the time. So can you recap your CMT story, like your type of CMT? Are you married, single? When were you diagnosed? Wheelchair to walking, etc. Just a recap.
I know there's a lot there, but a brief intro and bio would be great.
Of course. Yeah. And it was such a blast to the past, Elizabeth, when you mentioned how we met. I had actually been admiring you from afar for years on the CMT forums at the time. And I was like, I like her. I want to get to know her. And so I could tell that you could take a little light ribbing when I gave you crap for not offering me an arm.
Absolutely. We laughed a lot about that.
And it's been such a pleasure to meet your entire family and see the incredible work that you and your brother and your husband and your son have all done for this community. It's truly incredible. Thank you.
Thank you.
As far as my story, largely thanks to Elizabeth, I started volunteering with the CMTA as a teenager. And I was already profoundly impacted by CMT at the time. I had just undergone some pretty major foot surgeries, which thankfully, luckily, got me out of a wheelchair at the time. And that journey is something that I cover a lot in my book that I published a few years ago, How Should a Body Be? Since then, I had a wonderful career at the CMTA for several years. I've gone on to do YouTube videos to share with other people about some of the things I wish I knew about CMT when I was younger, and that I feel really just a huge responsibility to share with the greater community. And I've gone on to become married. We have moved to London, England, about 6 years ago now. And I ended up creating a vision to travel. And that's really what I've been doing since then. I've been traveling the world with my husband and alone. And I had set a goal to visit 30 countries by the time that I was 30.
That is unbelievable. In terms of goal setting, we'll get more on that because I know you're a very goal-driven individual. And one thing just to get back to, rewind the tape, is I'm thinking about that diagnosis and when you were diagnosed, and just kind of, if you can recall, I know it was a young age, but do you have any recollection of your feelings or how you responded to that at that age? Did you walk out with this positive, oh, no big deal, that's cool? Or was it a challenging moment for you and or your family?
I was excited to get diagnosed. I basically figured out that I had this disease all on my own with the help of Google. It turns out now I know many years later, my entire family knew I had the disease, but it was sort of a secret in the family. So I was really excited that I was going to get my diagnosis that day. It feels a little bit at the age of I was 12, a little special, right? You like to feel special at that age. And I mean, I still like to feel special. But I quickly noticed, just even in the course of that 1 hour appointment, that it feels really different to know something is wrong with you than for other people to see and comment on it.
Mm-hmm.
And for the doctor to put his hands on my legs and my hands and tell me that he saw signs of the disease and tell me that I was going to be much worse affected than my father or my grandfather. And even in that conversation, he told my parents that I should never have children because
Wow.
that was how severe that this was going to be. So
Wow.
yeah, I quickly found out that being special maybe had a hard side to it.
Sure.
Bethany, do they understand why your CMT 1A is so much more severe than like your dad's?
It's not known yet, but the CMTA has been doing some fantastic research on just that to try to discover and hopefully identify if there's modifier genes that might turn my mutated gene on more than it is in my father, for example.
What are the differences between you and your dad in symptoms, symptom-wise?
Yeah, it's so interesting because we both have 1A, we both have the exact same gene. He now is in his 50s. He is mobile. He has never had surgeries, never had leg braces. And most people who've met him in his life would not recognize that anything was wrong. Then you have me, who, early on wasn't meeting milestones. By the time I was 15, I needed a wheelchair. I was dislocating my kneecaps, had these giant surgeries to, as the surgeon put it, destroy and rebuild my feet. And even in my 20s, have started having some breathing related difficulties to CMT. So it's really a profound difference between the two of us.
That's such a bummer.
Thanks for sharing that. That is one thing that I've noticed right throughout the podcast and people we interview, and just the variations in terms of either the symptoms, they have the same type of CMT, and people can be totally different in terms of what they're experiencing on a day-to-day basis.
Now you're in England, you're in London, and you moved there and you were visiting your countries. Did you reach that 30 countries?
First, I want to say that in learning how to deal with a progressive disease, one of my tips for all of you out there is to do things now. And so when I set goals, I tend to set them with time limits so that I will do things today and not tomorrow or next year or someday. But in this case, by 30, because I recognize that there aren't any guarantees in life.
That's true.
So I set this goal for 30, given a worldwide pandemic and severe knee injury that I had this last year. I didn't quite get it, but I did get to 28, and I can't wait to get to 30, hopefully in the next year or two.
What are the next two to get to 30?
There's so many great options. I'm thinking maybe Spain, maybe Morocco.
Yep. Awesome. And Lizzo, one more thing, just I wanted to jump in. Sorry. But on the goal setting, I believe you said, Bethany, which I had written down in past discussions with you. I think you made a reference, like, especially for our listeners or what works for you, is you made a reference like set goals that cannot be taken away, or it's acceptable to try to reach a goal, but you may not finish, and that's okay. So you want to comment on that a little bit? I think that's a pretty great way to look at goal setting.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I think that's so valuable and something I'm honestly still learning. After I had my surgeries and got out of a wheelchair, I went really aggressive on the physical goals. First, it was to walk a mile, and then it was to walk 7 miles, and then it was to walk half a marathon, and then it was to walk 40 and then 50 miles. And I hit each of those goals until I got to the point where I couldn't easily progress beyond that. And I started to define myself by those accomplishments, right? Which I was and still am tremendously proud of. But I realized now, as my disease continues to progress, the dangers in defining yourself by your physical abilities when you have a progressive disease, or honestly, even if you don't, because all of us age and all of us ultimately lose ability. And if you set your entire identity on that, that's really devastating when it goes away. It's a little thing, but I even looked at my Instagram bio last year, and you have one sentence to describe yourself in that bio. The sentence I chose was wheelchair to walking. And I was like, ooh, right. That was still true at the time. I was still walking, and I'd been in a wheelchair and wasn't that great, but I was like, ooh, is that how I want to define myself? Because I don't know if that's always going to be true for me. And that's not how I want to just measure my success as a person. And it also isn't, I don't want to implicitly suggest to anyone else reading that line that that should be their measure of success. Because wheelchair or walking, you can lead a tremendously full life. So to answer your question, I do still set physical goals for myself because I want to keep my body in the best shape it can be in, whatever that is year by year. But I've also started setting goals and finding hobbies that won't be taken away by disease progression. And so in addition to my country goal and all my physical goals, this year I said, hey, I want to have 30 new experiences this year. And that travel restrictions, disease, injury, whatever, I can still do 30 new things this year.
Like what? What's one of the 30 things?
Well, even just this Christmas holiday, I had some new English treats. I had eggnog for the first time and mince pies. We got our first real Christmas tree. And thanks to you, Elizabeth, and your husband, who I was lucky enough to meet up with in France for my birthday, you both drove me to Monaco, which was country number 28.
Woohoo! That's great. Bethany's father, like 6 months before the pandemic hit, 4 months, he said that there was going to be a pandemic. And I talked to Bethany and she's like, are you ready for the pandemic? I'm like, what are you talking about? This was like in November. I'm like, he's crazy. I'm like, he's nuts. I'm like, where's he getting his information? And then Bethany's like, no, there's a pandemic coming. So I didn't listen to her. And then January hit. I went out to the store and bought all these canned goods. I'm like, I think she's right. So then COVID hit, right? But it was an interesting story that your father, I don't know how he knew, but he saw this coming, right? And so for Bethany, we keep in touch. And during this last couple of years, she's had to stay home. I mean, seriously, stay home, because if she had had COVID with breathing issues and all that, and that was before the vaccinations, it was terrifying for everyone. So she had to stay home. Then her knee went out of joint, and that was a whole thing. I mean, it was painful. It lasted a long time. She got giardia after that. I mean, it's been a shit show, honestly.
Sure.
Literally.
With giardia.
All right, erase that picture from your minds, folks.
How have you dealt with all those struggles? I mean, if I can't go out every day, I feel like I'm going to poke myself in the eye.
Yeah, I mean, it can't be easy, right? Kind of that sense of isolation, and just humans need to interact and things of that nature. I mean, that's a great question.
And Josh stayed home with her the whole time. So how did that go?
I didn't deal with it well, to be honest. We did take isolation incredibly seriously, because I was told by my neurologist that I was at very high risk of coronavirus. So we didn't leave our flat for about 5 months, which takes a toll on your health mentally. You would think, what kind of trouble can you get into when you're just staying on your couch for 5 months? But as you pointed out, I had one of my worst health and injury and sickness years of my entire life this year. So it's been, as it has been for many people, just an incredibly hard year. And even just focusing on the night of my kneecap dislocation, which was, I remember we were on the phone with the second emergency dispatcher that night, and I was trying to answer his questions, but then my kneecap would start spasming and I would start screaming.
Oh.
So
because you couldn't get it back, right? It was out of joint.
Couldn't get it back in. So I'm screaming every time a spasm comes over me. And I remember the emergency dispatcher, my husband was now answering his questions. He said, so would you say your wife's pain is extreme pain?
While you're screaming in the background?
Yeah.
Meanwhile, I'm actively screaming in the background. And that was a 6-hour ordeal before they were finally able to get that kneecap back in. I think I just felt this year a tremendous feeling of unfairness. Leading up to that injury, I was actually the most motivated I'd been in a while, which motivation can be hard to sustain with something progressive.
Sure.
Because it's forever.
Yeah.
And it's easy to motivate myself for a short-term goal like a walk. But in terms of just taking care of myself day to day, exercising just to slow the decline, right? that's a different kind of motivation. That's like fighting a war. But I was ready for that war, and I was biking every single day on our stationary bike, biking for 30 minutes. I'd gotten up to, and I was working so hard. And then this happened. And in the context then of a respiratory virus out in the world, I felt just so out of control. And isn't that the feeling of having disease process in your body that you can't do anything about, is that feeling of being out of control. So it took a huge toll.
Bethany, and how
emotionally.
did you, I'm just thinking of that situation, right? You have this sense of motivation, and then you get kind of tossed to the sidelines with all of these obstacles, right? And so did you go through a states of depression, anxiety? It sounds like it was a challenging time for you, but can you tell us a little bit about that experience?
This isn't actually something I've spoken about publicly before, but
And you don't have to if you'd prefer not to. That's cool too.
Yes,
no,
you
I
do.
think it's important.
Okay, great.
I do, because I know there's got to be someone else out there listening who is feeling the same things that I have felt the last few years. And yeah, I felt tremendous anxiety and fear. And look, going out into the world with CMT kind of comes along with some fear.
Sure.
And just to pinpoint a moment or a feeling standing in the middle of a street, crossing it, that's terrifying for me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I know that at any second I can go down in that street with the slightest gust of wind or a pebble or just the sound of a dog coming up behind me or being tripped. And I know that if I fall in the street, I'm not going to be able to get back up. Right. And I know that I'm probably irritating all the people in the cars, and they're wondering what is wrong with her. And every moment I'm crossing that street, I am just absolutely terrified that I'm going to fall down. That's a moment. But I found that over the years, my body was primed for that fear response. And that even leaving my house, I started suddenly feeling afraid because I recognized that the world is dangerous for me. And then I started having breathing issues. And that is vulnerability on a completely different level.
Mm-hmm.
To feel like you can't breathe.
Awful.
And so now the outside world isn't safe. In my inside world, right, in my body, isn't safe either. And so over the last 5 years, this has just gradually increased to the point where my body is just kind of always in a state of terror, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of feeling very unsettled. And I did develop an anxiety disorder where even just the slightest stressor, could just be an incoming email that I need to respond to, would put my body in that fearful state. And yeah, I was depressed. I mean, how can you not be depressed?
Yeah.
Exactly.
With all the challenges that honestly the whole world has gone through this last year, I was absolutely depressed. I did all of the lifestyle factors, lifestyle changes that are recommended. I cleaned up my eating. I made sure I was supplementing my vitamin D. I tidied my home and keep it really tidy and in shape. I was doing regular exercise until I couldn't.
Mm-hmm.
I cut out caffeine. I cut down on my phone use. I tried meditation. I got a light therapy lamp. I was doing all the things and they helped a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say those things are a great place to start if any of you are feeling overwhelmed, depressed, lethargic. But the one thing that I didn't want to consider for years was medication.
Okay.
And it finally got to a point where I had done all of these things. And even though I didn't want to admit that, I guess, Chris, growing up with CMT, you're always told your mind is the one thing that is spared. And I was always told I had a good mind. So I've taken a lot of pride in that, right? The mind is okay. Everything else is going to crap.
Right. But you have your mind. Yeah.
I have my mind, right? And so to admit that my mind could be sick was really hard. But I got to the point where I just knew that I deserved better. And that was when I called my general practitioner and said I wanted to try a medication. And he prescribed a low dose of an antidepressant, which has been absolutely life-changing.
Wow. It's a telling story, because what I always think about is, which I haven't gotten the full answer yet, and I don't know if I ever will, but at some point there is a trigger that motivates someone to get out of that existing state of depression and feeling down, but wanting to do something. I just think it's an interesting discussion. And I don't know if there was an external factor, or you just woke up one day and had this aha moment like, hey, this isn't right. I'm going to get better. But I think it's a progression towards that state. And I just find it interesting because some people can stay in that negative state for such a long period of time. And not that it's totally over forever, but they jump to the next level to try to help themselves.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you mentioned an external factor, because there have been other situations in my life where I have needed someone else in my life to tell me, you need to change this. For example, I didn't make the decision to quit my job, which I absolutely needed to do because I was struggling a lot with health, physically and mentally, and it was too much. But I didn't make that decision until actually just an acquaintance in my life said, you need to quit your job.
Yeah.
Right. And it was like, oh, they'd given me permission to do this thing for myself. And I've had other examples of that where I've sort of needed that person to give me permission, or to say, you deserve better than this situation that you're putting yourself in. And so this time when it came to getting on an antidepressant, I was talking to people in my life and I was hoping they would give me permission. I was hoping they would shake me and say, do this. But instead they were very nice, and they were like, we support whatever you decide.
Mm-hmm. And
then I would come away from the conversation really frustrated because I realized I wanted someone to tell me to do it and give me permission. And I finally realized that I can make that choice. I can decide that I deserve better. I can give myself permission. And that's what I finally did.
That's awesome.
It's hard I'm not sure I can state this correctly, but for me, since I've had a lot of injuries, I don't trust my body. And I'm wondering if you had that same sense, since you just took a step and your knee went out of joint. You were in shape. So how do you go back to not just sitting on the couch paralyzed, and you still go out and walk assisted with someone, but you keep going and you keep trying? Are you fearful that your body's just going to do something else? Or do you feel convinced that, I don't know, how do you feel?
Tremendously fearful.
But you do it anyway.
You have to do it anyway, slowly, gradually, lovingly, feeling in control. I will never let someone push me to do something physically that I don't feel ready to do.
Right.
That's very important, that I don't feel safe in. Yeah, I try to talk myself through the fear. Normally, the fear responses that I get are like my biological system telling me, you're going to die, you're going to die, you're going to die, don't die, stop doing what you're doing, you're going to die. That system is hardwired into us for protection. It's a great thing. But, I try to talk to that system and I'm like, hey, thank you for the warning. I feel you. I hear you.
Yeah.
This actually is really important for me to cross the street right now, or to take this step, and it's going to be okay. So that's one thing. I also have been working on the way that I talk to my body. I was so angry at my knee for months. I was like, you little bad knee.
Bleep, bleep, bleep.
Bad knee. You were a bad knee. You had one job, right? And what? You decide to go on holiday over to the side of my leg? What, were you bored? Did I not entertain you? Right? I was so irritated. And then I'm like, and then you get lost, right? You can't even find your way home. And I was like, ah. And then I realized that no, we need to heal this relationship because on some level, my body is me and it's all I've got. And we need to work together. So me and the knee did a little relationship therapy. We said some things. We apologized. I learned that the knee didn't actually mean to leave its little groove. The knee was frightened too, right? This was traumatic, not just for me, but for the knee. She was incredibly scared. She has promised never to do it again. And we've healed that relationship. But yeah, ultimately, I have to take a step and just trust in it.
Yeah, I love that comment that you said when Elizabeth asked the question, you said you have to. So I just think that's great. You move forward. It must be frightening, but I give you so much credit for doing that.
I love the self-talk, Bethany, also.
Me too.
I love the self-talk because even though you're laughing, it's hard not to be angry with that body part that's not functioning. And I always want to push it away and say, go away. I hate you. And like, what the hell? What's going on?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
But you need to come to some sort of agreement with that body part, and love and compassion is a big part of it.
Yeah. Yeah. One question that we have, and I hear this a lot, and I'm just curious in terms of your views on this. Many folks that we've talked to, and I'm not saying it's a large population by any means, but you know, when you say like, hey, if you had a choice to have CMT or not, what are your thoughts? And a lot of folks say, no, I wouldn't change anything because CMT has really defined the person that I am. What are your feelings around that? And what I mean, I don't know if you feel that way or you don't, but it's interesting to get the feedback from a lot of different folks, and they have different perspectives on that.
So if the question is, would I get rid of CMT now? Absolutely, right? That's why I support the CMTA finding treatments, because I would love to not have to worry about progression for the rest of my life. That would be fantastic. If the question is, could I go back, live my life over without CMT? It's tempting.
Sure.
But no, because I don't know where I would end up. And honestly, my life is pretty great.
Mm-hmm.
I have an incredible husband who I wouldn't have met had I not had CMT. I have incredible friends and family. I live in one of the most fascinating cities in the world.
You're close to the royal family.
I'm like a mile away from the royal family. I'm waiting for my invitation to tea any day now. And I've had, at 30, just an incredible life of adventure. I have climbed stone monasteries in Bulgaria, and I have searched for the Loch Ness Monster in Scotland. I have ridden on a camel cart in India. I got lost in the hills of Austria and found a happiness making machine.
That's cool.
It's been a cool life, and it's also been a really challenging one. But no, I wouldn't give it all up because I am incredibly grateful for where I am now.
Oh, well, thank you.
Bethany, I remember us talking and you said life is short but long. What did you mean by that?
When I was diagnosed with CMT, I was a young teenager, preteen. When I was in college, I was struggling a lot with identity and how people thought of me. I was terrified to be seen in my leg braces and, what people would say and what people would think. And I was struggling also just with some really practical considerations of how do I get to the cafeteria? And how do I get to class? These were really real challenges in that moment, right? In today. It's now as I've gotten a little bit older that I start thinking of the rest of my lifespan, and not just the challenges of today, but the challenges of tomorrow. I mean, once again, there's a lot of fear in that of where am I going to be in 10, 20, 30 years? How is my breathing going to be? If I have children, what kind of mother will I be able to be? What will I be able to provide to my children or to my husband? What is my longevity going to be? I don't have answers for any of these questions, but I just think it's a long journey with something that, oh, sorry, I'm struggling with this answer.
No, it's perfect.
It is perfect. Yeah, it is a long journey.
I would say too, it's a long journey,
Mm-hmm.
and the challenges change with every chapter of life.
Yeah.
Mhm.
This past year has really just been the hardest year of my life to date. And it really felt like it had no redeeming qualities at all. So I was saying for months, I was like, man, I could have just skipped this year,
Yeah.
right? Like, I wish I could have just slept through it because there was nothing good here. I had all these things I wanted to do this year by my 30th birthday, and I did none of them. And it just felt like such a waste. And now looking back at the end of the year and entering 2022, I recognize that growth and progress takes a lot of different forms. The growth I needed this past year wasn't walking 50 miles, and it wasn't actually visiting 30 countries. It was learning patience, it was gaining resilience, it was recognizing what I value. And now I look at this year and I'm like, that was not a fun year, but it was an important year.
Mm-hmm.
And there was valuable growth in that year. And I hope that in the long lifespan and the myriad of challenges in my life that I will experience with CMT, that every year I will grow to meet those challenges.
Awesome. Can we talk a little bit, Elizabeth? Lizzo,
Yeah.
I should say, Elizabeth Lizzo. Go for it.
Oh, so, well, why don't you ask her about her book? Because I sent that to you not too long ago. And I also gave it to a good friend of mine, and she read it in like 90 minutes and loved it and just wrote raving reviews. And I know you've gone through it, Chris. So go ahead.
Well, I mean, there's a few questions that we have, one of which I'm kind of curious. What prompted you to write this book? How should a body be?
I really just had a story to tell. It was like a compulsion to put it down on paper. And honestly, to turn something that was painful into something that was beautiful and could help other people. And the responses that I've gotten from patients who feel really seen for the first time has made that so worthwhile, because it is, publishing a memoir is deeply personal. There's some intense stuff in there, but it's been so worthwhile too to hear from family members or friends of people with CMT who are like, man, for the first time, I get it.
Right.
And I realized that I've maybe been an insensitive spouse or an insensitive brother, right? And now I know what my loved one is dealing with. And thank you. It's been fun to give copies of my books to researchers and have them tell me afterwards that motivates them to research harder, right? That is what we love to hear.
That's
so
what you want.
it's just been a tremendously rewarding project.
Yeah,
That's
you can't really tell what a person's like when you are working on Schwann cells. You have to see the face of the disease. Exactly. So that
And
helped out a lot. Mhm.
There is, I'm actually holding the book right here.
How should a body be?
Yeah. And just, can people go out and buy this book today?
Yes, it's available on Amazon.
So how should a body be? And so I do want you to comment specifically as I was going through this chapter 13, which is called A Body Observed. And there's a comment you said, I thought, or a few comments, and I'm just I won't read it out of the book, but on my notes. Your comment was, after joining a support group, I experienced the immediate sense of belonging that I was looking for. What I didn't anticipate was the level of comfort people with my disease would have about commenting on my body. So can you just give us some insight on those statements? I just thought that was cool.
It's a pro and a con, that one. I remember at a support group meeting, I'd shared this like really vulnerable story and I probably cried, right? And afterward, an elderly man, he came up to me And he took my hands into his, and I'm like, oh, he's going to say how great I am and like how good my talk was. And instead, he doesn't address me or look at me at all. He shows my hands, like he grabs my hands, shows them to the elderly woman next to him. And he says, her hands are real bad like yours. And then drops my hands and they walk away.
Sweet.
Yeah, a really, really nice interaction. That's obviously an extreme example, but
Sure.
it is funny that us with CMT were so comfortable commenting. And I try to be really careful when I comment on other people's bodies based on that experience, and to never suggest that something is negative, because that person hopefully doesn't feel that way about their body. And I would never want to make them feel that way.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So when's the second book coming out, Bethany? Do you have a second book in the works? I'd love to read it.
I do. Yeah, I'm working on a second book now. I've been working on it for the past couple years. It's called Traveling Slowly.
Oh, cool.
And of course, it's got a lot of travel stories and learning to travel with CMT and the adventures that my husband and I have taken together throughout Europe. And also some of what we've talked about today, which is learning how to balance this girl who wants to do everything and take on the world, and also a body that has limits and needs to take things slowly.
Yeah.
Well, I want to say that now that you're using a wheelchair for a short period of time, Josh is getting a great workout. So he is going to be like
I've heard about
Mr.
that.
Atlas by the end of this.
He is. Yeah, he's been complaining of sore arms after our wheelchair outings.
Yeah.
When we were in Nice, Bethany wanted to go to a museum and Josh had to push her up this big hill.
Goodness.
And she got back and she's like, I think I broke Josh.
So listen, it's interesting on the topic of Josh, and I think about this as well. I wanted to get your feelings or insight in terms of how do you feel about accepting help from others, and or specifically from your husband? What's that experience like? Have you had moments where you're like, I don't need any help? You're someone that I believe stands on their own. You have a very good mind. You're goal driven. So what is it like to accept help from others? And how do you let them in?
In order to do things and live my life, I really have to accept help from others. I did a big trip, which part of it was solo travel through Europe, starting in Romania. And I needed to ask strangers for help all the time. Otherwise, I would just end up stranded somewhere. So I've gotten a lot better at that with practice. Strangers typically seem to be totally delighted to give me an arm or help lift my bag. So those are actually really nice interactions. In terms of my husband, I have to acknowledge that I am really blessed. He has always been incredibly supportive. He has been intuitive from the moment we started dating 12 years ago in what type of help I need. He's an excellent arm. Some people really suck at giving an arm. They try to like pull you along, and it's just a nightmare.
Yeah. Elizabeth I know you're talking about Elizabeth, but go ahead.
I'm sorry, Bethany. I'll try harder.
Well, no, she has to give me the arm in the first place.
Oh, that's a good point. I forgot about that. It's a two-stage process. All right.
And in the 12 years we've been together, he's never once said something to make me feel bad for needing help.
Awesome.
So that helps. But I also don't feel bad about asking or needing his help, because I recognize that I help and support him equally, just in different ways. He may give me an arm when we're out going somewhere in London, but I also listen to him after a hard day at work. Or he may open the spaghetti jar for me, but I'm the one who's tracking our vitamins and setting them out for him every day. We both support each other. That's what partners do.
Yeah.
I just think some of the ways in which he supports me are more visually obvious to others. The only times I do feel bad are when I feel like that dynamic has gotten uneven.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely felt that this year, where for the first time he was having to do tremendous caretaking. For months, he was having to help me to and from the bathroom. He was having to help me shower and get dressed and make all of my meals. And I could recognize the toll that was taking on him. So I look for ways to keep things in balance. I usually have a habit at night of asking, what can I do for you tomorrow?
Aw.
Right? What's one little thing I can do that would make your life easier tomorrow? And so that's what I would say in terms of that
That's
relationship.
incredible
Thank you.
insight. Yeah.
Definitely.
Incredible insight. So, Bethany, I could talk to you for the next 5 hours, but unfortunately, we're coming to an end. And I want to thank you. So, in closing, though, I'm not quite finished. What advice can you provide our listeners today? Like some words of wisdom going forth in their lives with CMT?
I remember I was giving a talk in Michigan once to a CMTA support group. And at the end of it, and there was a young girl in the audience, and I was like, oh man, I feel bad. She's probably bored, dragged here by her parents. And after the talk, I took a Q&A and she raised her hand. I was like, oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
And she said, I have CMT. What advice would you give me? I was like, wow, all right, Bethany, like, don't screw this up. And so I told her, life can be fantastic. I told her that growing up, I looked at my mom who doesn't have CMT, and I looked at the life she had lived. She had been to 30 countries. She lived in a castle. She lived on a ship. She was a black belt. She lived this incredible, vibrant, adventurous life. And for a while, I thought that that was inaccessible to me because of my CMT. And I have learned that I was wrong. There may be limits on my body, which I test. I test them regularly, but there are not limits on the quality and the vibrance of the life that I can lead. So that's what I told her. And that's what I would tell anyone listening, is that life can be fantastic.
Oh, that's powerful. I will remember that. And I'm sure our listeners will as well.
You're awesome.
Beautiful.
Hey, Bethany, if somebody wanted to look you up and look at your book and your videos, YouTube channel, where would I send them?
Yeah. So my book is on Amazon. How Should a Body Be? Right now I've been really into doing YouTube videos for the CMT community. So you can find me under my name, Bethany Meloche, on YouTube. I'm also Bethany Meloche on Instagram and Facebook. And it would be wonderful to connect with people, because let's learn from each other. That's what I love so much about what you two are doing. I just think connected, we are so much stronger.
I agree. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Gosh, you're such a great
awesome.
guest. I love you.
Well,
I love you too.
we're gonna have to get Bethany back on, because, like I said, you said, Lizzo, this could go on for so long, and you have so many inspirational comments, Bethany, and just a very powerful person. And we feel fortunate to have had you on this podcast today.
Oh, thank you.
And the other way you can get some traffic is, I'm thinking for our listeners, you probably picked up a few English type of words today. So if you are thinking of moving to London, you can call Bethany and she'll find and recommend a flat for you.
She uses that word, by the way.
If you would like to visit, she can tell you where to go on holiday. So
That's absolutely right. Anyone ever coming through London, let me know, and we'll go out for a pint or a cup of tea.
there we go.
There we go.
All right. Well, thanks. Yes. Thanks so much, Bethany. And also we want to thank Josh as well. Just sounds like an incredible individual. I've met him, I believe, once or twice, and having him in your life has got to be a great thing. So,
and her mom and dad are awesome also.
And don't mess around with her mom, because she is a black belt. I just realized that. So I'm a little nervous next time I meet her. So, Lizzo, with that, if someone wants to learn more about CMT and or to donate to our cause, where should they go?
CMTAUSA.org. And there's so much information and so many resources. Go there, check it out.
You got it, folks. Really, go to the site, save this as a bookmark. There's ongoing information, and just a great site for our listeners.
And to our listeners, do you have a good story? Would you like to tell your story on our podcast, CMT for Me? If you do, write to us, info@CMTAUSA.org. Pitch your idea. We want to hear from you.
Okay, Lizzo, the bells at Westminster Abbey are ringing. Toodaloo.
Ta-ta, bruv.
Adios, folks. Till
Love
next
you guys.
time.
Bye-bye.
Love everybody.